Here we're going to talk about the digestive system. The digestive system is made of a number of organs: the stomach, the pancreas, the small and the large intestines. And the purpose of the digestive system is to break down these big molecules we've got over here, like carbohydrates, like starch, and proteins and fats, which are they're all big and they're insoluble, and it's to break them down by enzymic degradation, to break them down into smaller molecules which are amino acids, which are soluble and can pass across the walls of the small intestine into the blood vessels, which are very intimately associated with the small intestine. I haven't drawn the blood vessels on the small intestine there. It's a bit too complicated, but there's going to be lots of blood vessels there, and the food is going to pass out of the small intestine into the blood vessels, and that those blood vessels collect to form into a vein, the hepatic portal vein, and that gets carried to the liver here, and then the liver processes all those small molecules which have been absorbed from the food. Okay, so that's the general principles of it. The small intestine, there's a lot of absorption carrying on there, and it's important that it has a very large surface area, and that's why the small intestine is just this curling, here. It does it a lot more than I've just drawn there. This is just a diagram, obviously, to increase the length of the small intestine. Then also, if you look at if you do a cross section of the small intestine that we've got here, you can see the surface area is increased even further by the presence of these small protrusions on the surface, which are called villi. Okay, so the surface area of the small intestine is extremely large, and it needs to be to absorb all the food efficiently. Okay, so let's look at the journey of the food. Right, first of all, it's going to come into the stomach, and here we go. So the stomach secretes hydrochloric acid onto the food, and that's going to make it about pH 1, which is pretty acidic, and that will kill any bacteria which have been taken in with the food, and inevitably they will be, and it will kill most of those, and that's pretty important. Now, the stomach, you also get a bit of digestion of proteins in the stomach, and by an enzyme which the stomach makes it's called pepsin. I'll talk about that in a minute, but that is a very unusual enzyme because it works best at pH 1, whereas most enzymes we know work best at pH 7, neutral. Okay, so once the food leaves the stomach, it's going to come into the small intestine, and then we've got these two organs here, which are extremely important in making secretions which digest the food. We've got the pancreas, we'll talk about in a minute, and we've also got the liver. And the liver, in the middle of the liver, we have this organ, this feature of the liver called the gallbladder, which stores a substance made by the liver called bile. Okay, and bile it's an emulsifier. And what is that emulsifier? It's like soap or washing up liquid. It breaks up fat into small droplets, and that's really important. The fat is in great big droplets. There's not enough surface area for the enzymes later to digest that, so that's really important. That the bile, it's not an enzyme. It's not chemical breaking up. It's just a physical breaking up of big blobs of fat into very small blobs of fat. Also, the bile also contains, it's slightly alkaline, the secretion of the bile, and that's really important because it will neutralize the stomach acid. And if that didn't happen, then the pancreas enzymes, which work best at pH 7, they wouldn't be able to work. So the pancreas actually makes an enzyme which can digest. An enzyme it produces which can digest starch. It can digest protein, and another enzyme which can digest fats. So the pancreas is one of the main digestive enzyme producing organ, and it secretes its secretions into the small intestine here, and they begin their work of breaking down the small molecules. Incidentally, by the time you get to here, that's the end of the small intestine, and then you go into the large intestine, and the large intestine is large. Well, you just reabsorb water in the large intestine. All of the small molecules, the nutrient molecules, have been reabsorbed, and the large intestine just reabsorbs the water. That's very important, because if you didn't, then you'd lose huge volumes of water and become dehydrated, which is of course what happens in diarrhea. Right. So let's look at the three food groups in sequence and see what happens to each of those in the process of digestion. Okay. So right, I've just drawn the diagram again on a smaller scale there, but let's look at proteins. Okay. So first of all, proteins are made up of amino acids, and they are joined together covalently bonded together into proteins. Each protein is hundreds to thousands of amino acids long, and they need to be broken down into these monomers. There's actually 20 different naturally occurring amino acids. That's why I've drawn all different symbols. Now the enzyme which will break them down, there's one produced in the stomach, and that is called pepsin. And there is another one produced in the pancreas, and we'll just call that proteinase. Anything ending in ase is usually an enzyme in biology, so that the pancreas does that. And in actual fact, those two enzymes don't complete the process of digestion of proteins. It breaks it down into tripeptides and dipeptides. That's 2 amino acids or 3 amino acids joined together, and the final digestion actually occurs on the surface of the cells lining the small intestine, but you don't strictly need to know that for GCSE. Okay, so that's how proteins are digested. Now let's look at carbohydrates like starch. Well, you get actually a tiny bit of digestion of carbohydrate. Digestion starts in the mouth, because in your saliva you produce an enzyme called amylase, which can digest starch, but it doesn't get much of a chance to act on the starch, because then you swallow the food and it goes into your stomach. It's very acidic, and salivary amylase doesn't work at that pH. So once the food leaves the stomach, the main digestion of carbohydrates starts when the pancreas secretes amylase, and that will break the glucose, the starch here, which is the polymer, the big molecule, into the monomers, which are small, and they are soluble. And again, it's a bit like the situation with the proteins. You actually end up, amylase doesn't break it down completely into glucose. It breaks it down into like dipeptides, sorry, disaccharides. So 2 glucoses stuck together, and that final splitting occurs again on the surface of the cells of the small intestine. But as I say, you don't really need to know that for GCSE. Right. Now let's talk about fats, how they're digested. So fats are not polymers, actually, but they are made up of 4, each fat molecule is made up of 4 things. It's made up of one called glycerol, that green one there, and it's made up of 3 fatty acids, the blue one there. But they need to be broken down by an enzyme called lipase, which is again produced by the pancreas. But to help the lipase work, first of all, the fat is dispersed into little droplets by bile, which is produced by the liver. So I remember seeing a question a few times. You think of two substances which aren't enzymes, which are secreted by the digestive system, which help digestion, but they're not enzymes. Well, one is a hydrochloric acid, which is secreted in the stomach, and that helps kill bacteria, and it helps the enzyme, the proteinase pepsin, work. And the other one would be bile, which is not an enzyme. It's just, as I say, it's a detergent molecule, breaks it down into smaller bits. Okay, just finally, in the large intestine, we said most of the water is reabsorbed from the food. So if you have a drink of water, that's where that is going to get reabsorbed. It goes all the way to the stomach, small intestine, it gets reabsorbed in your large intestine, it goes into your bloodstream from there. So if your large intestine isn't working, you can't absorb any water, and you will get dehydrated and die if it doesn't stop. Also in the large intestine, you will get a lot of undigested material, which is called fiber or roughage. And of course, we know that fiber is really important to keep the digestive system healthy. You do need some undigestible material in your food to bulk it up, to allow it to be processed. And an awful lot of that fiber is actually cellulose from plants, which is a polymer of glucose, but we don't have the enzymes to digest it. So it all just gets egested. It's not broken down, it's not absorbed.